Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com with this week's episode of the Market Monday. Yes, it's not Monday, but yesterday was Memorial Day, and I was out having fun, so I decided to do it today. And I think that there is a relevant topic to talk about in the modern realm because there were two events, the Grand Prix Copenhagen and the Grand Prix Kobe, is that how you say that, whatever it was? And I actually think that modern is back to a investable point. I know that a lot of my Market Mondays really focused in 2016 about how modern was collapsing and falling, and I do think this is going to be a recovery year because of the Modern Masters that got reprinted, the Modern Masters 3. We also have a big Modern Masters tournament coming up in Vegas, and it seems that the metagame is pretty much stabilized, where one deck has a really hard time getting even over 5% of the meta share. So that's a great time to invest in a format that has such diversity because it creates a lot of movement, and movement is what causes prices to go up rather than what we like to call stagnation, which we're starting to see in Standard again with Aetheric Marvel, which is funny because Aetheric Marvel is 30% of the meta, yet Ulamog and Marvel are actually going down. So solid formats and formats with not a lot of diversity aren't very good times to actually buy into those formats. I think a lot of people are enjoying modern. I still particularly think it's too degenerate, too powerful for me to get back into. Again, I like to play value-based decks and mid-range based decks, and the deck or modern is very, very aggressive, and either very combo or very aggressive, or even in the extreme end of that has decks that really, really try to control, like Lantern Control or UI Control. So I typically don't like to play those type of formats personally, but for other people, I am hearing a lot of positivity in the modern realm. And one thing as an investor, the worst thing you can do is kind of become jaded by your own feelings towards something. That led to a lot of terrible missed opportunities in the commander sphere, because when I got into investing cards, I just ignored casual and commander because it just wasn't my cup of tea, and I just didn't foresee that there would be that many people out there that really got into the format and would cause as much movement. I was just really biased towards my own feelings toward competitive Magic. So I'm going to try not to do that with Modern and actually take another look at Modern and see what we can learn from these two Grand Prix over the weekend, which I believe had pretty good showings, as well as like there's some Star City Opens. So here currently is the Modern metagame. A lot of this has to do with the MTGO aspect of it because it gets weighed a lot higher because how Goldfish does is they'll take all the paper tournaments and all of the MTGO, but of course there's just more raw data from MTGO. And it looks like Affinity is now the top dog, which a few weeks ago it was the Storm, and a few weeks before that it was Death Shadow. So we are starting to see a kind of self-rotating modern as far as what is the top dog. In fact, the Death Shadows, there's been enough diversity now that it's Grixis Death Shadow that has kind of overtaken the more Delirium-based Death Shadow. So what we're going to look at right now is any undervalued cards and see if there is any opportunity to invest. So after a Grand Prix, that's the best thing. Ignore this page for the moment, because the most relevant when people are going to be looking at decks that did well or just coverage in general, they're going to be looking at these two Grand Prix. So Copenhagen was won by Grixis Death Shadow and had some living ends, Lantern Controls, Gift Storm, Counter Call. I mean, very, very diverse, even top 8. Is there only 2 Death Shadows decks, and they are different in the top 8. So that's good news. And then the Grand Prix Kobe, or Kobe, someone correct me on this. I don't know where this is at. Bad geography lesson for me tonight. I guess I'll look it up. But this one was actually won by White Black Eldrazi, which is a pretty sweet list because we haven't seen this type of deck for a long time. I think even it was one of the very first Eldrazi type decks to come out the gate when the Iovugan wasn't banned. So we're going to take a look at some of these deck lists, and I'm going to give my 2 cents on where I think are some undervalued cards to invest in. So first of all, I want you to pay attention to this column right here, which is the top cards played in these two, or in this particular Grand Prix, and we'll look at the other one. Path to Exile was recently reprinted but I think that it will follow a very similar trajectory as the last time it was reprinted, but probably not enough to pull the trigger on. I mean, this is long term, and I really think it might be in the Iconic Masters, because Path to Exile is a very popular card. We could see it in a Commander set. It has been printed in Commander sets before, and we can see it in Arch Enemy. It was in the last Arch Enemy, I believe, and it is definitely a very easy reprint to just chuck in that box set. They also need a way to sell the set, and having like an $8 card is just a quick way to get that estimated value up, or just the value of that product up, by throwing in an uncommon that does need an additional reprint. Thoughtseize has had a buying spree lately, and I think that Thoughtseize is pretty close for another reprint. I can't see it gaining too much value until the inevitability of it being reprinted in Modern Masters 4. So I don't think I would invest in Thoughtseize. Collective Brutality is not the right time, neither is Fatal Push, because they're both in Standard. I only like to invest in these type of cards after rotation, because some of the pressure will be relieved after they rotate, and a lot of those will go into the market. Serum Vision's just had double reprintings. Lightning Bolt's been printed a bazillion times. Collected Company seems a little bit overvalued to where I think that it's destined for another reprint. And Birds of Paradise just had an Eternal Masters reprint. However, I do believe that Birds of Paradise does have a pretty nice little trajectory within the next year. Currently, it's sitting around $5, I believe, and $5.31, and it's starting to show that it's stripping the supply. It bottomed out at $4.75, so it's already had a nice little growth since the Eternal Masters. In fact, it came out of the Eternal Masters around 4, and this is one of the most played cards because of the Coco and the Court of Calling decks being very, very popular with different flavors, even the Nightfall type deck. And Birds of Paradise is here to stay. It's positioned itself as a modern staple for the fast mana for green, and in those creature-based Court of Calling / Collected Company decks. So I think if you want a place to park your money, Birds of Paradise is a great place for that. And parking your money can be just as good as making risky investments. Like, one of the worst problems with Magic, especially with Standard, is when it rotates, you lose so much value. And so around rotation time, about this time, is the perfect time to get out of Standard. And if you want a safe place to go, Staples are the right way to go. And Birds of Paradise, it's been reprinted a bazillion times. It sees tons of play in Casual, Commander, and Modern. I don't think it sees much Legacy play, maybe every now and again. But, I mean, this has a track record of really being a stable card no matter how many times they've reprinted it. And you can see that it's been reprinted a plethora of times. So that's a great place if you want that stable growth over the next year, over the next 2 years. Even if it does get another reprint in Iconic Masters, which is probably going to happen, I don't see it killing the price too much. So that'd be my only aversion to investing in this is Iconic Masters. And what's more iconic than a Birds of Paradise? So let's keep going down this list. Snapcaster Mage just got a reprint. Devoted Druid is insanely expensive at the moment, and I think that if the next ban, if a ban does happen, Devoted Druid could be on that if these counter copies or counter company decks do start to have more of the pie of the modern metagame. So again, you can go down these lists with the creatures and go down the spells. And there's really one thing that when we're looking at both these lists that stands out for the most investable card as far as the most played card. And to me, that would have to go to the Relic of Progenitus. And I like Relic of Progenitus because I think enough time has elapsed since the Eternal Masters, and enough of these decks are so graveyard-based, have such a graveyard-based strategy. To a point, the Grixis Death Shadow does, but the Jund Death Shadow definitely has a graveyard strategy to it. The Storm has a huge graveyard aspect to it. Living End and Dredge also have a lot to do with the graveyard, and one of the best ways to deal with it is going to be the Relic of Progenitus. So right now, the Relic of Progenitus is still flatlined, and it's been this way since last year about this time, after the Eternal Masters was released. So I think that it's going to be historically right now where this starts to go up. And if you actually look at how many times this has been reprinted, just in the original Modern Masters, which is not significant, this is not enough print run for the original Modern Masters, and the Shards of Alara, which also was a very, very small print run. And then we had it in the Modern Event deck, which again, I don't think is going to be enough Plane Chase, it did get there. The Plane Chase anthologies did do Plane Chase 2 though, so I don't believe it did Plane Chase 1 for the reprints. So anyway, I think that just the Eternal Masters is the real heavy supply of this particular card, and it's inevitably going to go up. And I could see this card being the next one of those uncommons that really starts to increase to the $3, $4, $5 mark. And so if you don't have your copies of Relic of Progenitus, I think it's a good time to get into them. I don't foresee a better graveyard hate card in the near future. I know that we have other options like Nihil Spellbomb and Rest in Peace for those colors, black and white, Leyline of the Void. But as far as just a card that is easy to put in any deck or any sideboard, Relic of Progenitus is a very, very powerful card for Modern. And $2 I think is a bargain. So out of the list, that would be my pick of the card to invest in or start to pick up these pieces. Again, even though it says $2, this is where you want to get the deals, the $1.50s, the $1.25s. And I guarantee within a year, this is going to get at least a 50% increase to that, $3 mark, if not more. So again, all the rest of these on this list, I don't think is the opportune time as far as the most played cards in this tournament. So let's just start going down. We're going to start with Copenhagen. The one that stands out in Copenhagen to me is going to be the UR gifts, because if you actually look at some of these decks, let's just check out the Grixis Death Shadow. There's not a lot of opportunity to invest in these cards as far as them going up in the near future. With, I would say, Tasigur is probably a good place, but we've seen that Fate Reforged just has so much supply out there, as well as this card wasn't in an event deck, and so it's hard as just a 2-of to really justify Tasigur going up too much. In fact, it's pretty much been flat for a long time. I mean, we saw this $2 to $2.85, but that's not that significant. And I think there needs to be a lot more of a reason for me to invest in Tasigur than just a 1-of or a 2-of in some of these decks that tend to be the flavor of the week of these archetypes. So I do like Tasigur long term. It's also a very popular commander card, very popular in 1v1 commander, but it's banned in many of the lists. But as far as Modern concerned, it's too risky, or just too not very exciting of a card for me to invest in. Same thing with Death Shadow. Death Shadow I think is still overpriced for an Eternal Masters, a Modern Masters reprint. Especially when we're going to compare it to a Modern Masters card, I think is a much better place. And it sees as much play as Death Shadow, and actually goes back to more Eternal and casual appeal than the Death Shadow. So let's go back over to Copenhagen. Living End, there's not a lot to invest in Living End. There's a lot of commons that were printed in the latest set, but it's something. Living End tends to show up when no one's ready for it, and then when people are ready for it, it just gets smashed. Lantern Control is really being held back by Mox Opals and a few other cards making this. I think this one was a pretty unique list, though, for Lantern Control, running a lot of Leyline of Sanctities, which this card has just snuck up on us. In the look how fast since the Modern Masters flatline here has it gone back up. Man, doubled in price. Really should have picked those cards up. Kicking myself for not. But anyway, other than that, out of Lantern Control, it has a lot of cards that are just super expensive, and I tend to avoid decks decks that have these cards that they're keeping people from getting into them. So the Ensnaring Bridge and the Mox Opal need a reprint before I can really see these other cards that might be investable going up in value. Abrupt Decay is one of those that I think long term can go up in value, but I still like another target in Modern Masters over the Abrupt Decay, which we'll get to in a second. So Copenhagen, we have the Counters Company, which I think the Birds of Paradise is really the only thing that I would consider. Scavenging Ooze seems pretty low at $2.50, but I've talked about this pretty relentlessly in other videos. It's a great place to throw your money at. But Court of Calling Collecting Company, I do believe will continue to go up in value, but as a percentile gain, it has a lot less room to grow than something that is undervalued, in my opinion. It's good to see Gavin Township be above $5. I invested in these when they were pretty much bulk rare, which is a pretty good win. Clear back here, so not quite bulk, but around $1. But again, really in this deck is just the Birds of Paradise and to an extent the Scavenging Ooze. But the next list, or the next deck in this one, the Storm, is where I really think is the best opportune time to invest in a particular card, and this is Gifts Ungiven. As we saw, this is the third most played deck, and it is $4, and it's a 4 of in this deck. But that's really not what I really want to focus on. Is this right here is what I want to focus on. How cheap this deck is to get in, especially if you do not need the Scalding Tarns, or if you just choose to run a fetch land that is, and you don't have to run a Scalding Tarn. It helps you in the case you have to go get that basic island, or the basic mountain, the one of basic mountain. But for the vast majority of the times, a Flooded Strand, War, or any other blue-based land will work out just as well as the Scalding Tarn. So they are running the Polluted Delta here, but I mean the other blue one would be the Flooded Strand, which would be the budget version of the Scalding Tarn. It can still go get that basic island and still go get that Steam Vents, which is exactly what this deck wants to be doing. So I really like this deck because everything is super, super cheap. When Manamorphose is the most expensive card besides lands in the deck, you know that this is going to be like one of these entry-level decks that people are going to buy. And the Gifts Ungiven, the Past in Flames, I think are just pretty undervalued. I don't like Past in Flames because it was just double reprinted. Reprinted in Modern Masters and reprinted in Commander. There's just too many copies of these running around compared to the Gifts Ungiven. If we go back to the Gifts Ungiven, this is a card that was only printed in the original Modern Masters and back in Champions of Kamigawa, as well as from the Vault Exiled. But it's a very, very powerful card. We've seen decks built completely around this card in the past with the Unburial Gifts. You never know when that deck is going to show its ugly head again, and people start running that. It's just a few broken creatures off from, or just the metagame shifting for the Unburial Gifts to come back. And that's a very, very key piece in those type of decks. And we've also started to see Gifts Ungiven be just shoved in decks as value cards, like the blue-white control. And very, very smart investment in my opinion. It's my #1 pick for this one's Market Monday, is the Gifts Ungiven. Alrighty, so we're going to go back to Copenhagen a little bit further, and not a lot of stuff. Like the Eldrazi-tron, I think, is something you'll want to get into those pieces later on at rotation. It requires the Thought-Knot Seers, Reality Smashers, and the Matter Reshapers. Out of these, the Thought-Knot Seers are by far the most played one. As you'll see in the white-black, it was the only one that was a 4 of. I believe the Reality Smasher was a 3 of, and Walking Blisses were not in that list. But this deck also has a huge barrier to entry with the Karn Liberated and the Chalices. It also has the Eldrazi Temple that's just been creeping up, 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 and up, where it feels bad to invest in uncommon. That's now, approaching over $11 a piece. But keep your eye on these cards. The Matter Shaper, the Thought-Knot Seer, and the Endbringer Reality Smasher. Endbringer was a promo. It was the launch day promo, so there's a lot of these they're out there that people don't. I don't think that Goldfish shows it. Yeah, it has a promo, not called the pre-release promo. Does it say event, though? Pre-release event. No, this definitely was a launch day. There's promos out here that exist. We have a ton of them lying around our store, for example. And that's going to keep the price down of Endbringer. But it's a card 2, 3, 4 years down the road could be a $3, $4, $5 card. And it's definitely a great option to invest in. Alright, so back to Copenhagen. Dredge, there's not a whole lot to do in Dredge. I do like a lot of the pieces. They do seem a bit undervalued for now. This deck has completely proven itself, even though it's had the recent banning hit this deck hard. Life in the Loam is probably due for a reprint, in my opinion. I think this one could easily be in the Arch Enemy. We have Stinkweed Imp that for a common that has had a reprint in just Modern Masters and Ravnica, I believe, and a few dual decks, is pretty much undervalued for a common. But 50 cents, yeah, that could easily go up. And same thing, the Golgari Thug, the Bloodghast. But Bloodghast tends to be a flavor of the week in these Dredge decks. It gets, sometimes like the Narcomeal Bloodghast gets a different way to build the Dredge, which, you know, there's plenty of different ways to do so. The main key components to the deck are going to be the Prize Amalgam, the Stinkweed Imp, and the Golgari Thug at this point, with the Neonate and the Cathartic Reunion being the two enablers for those really good Dredge draws. But, I mean, Dredge is here to stay, and I wouldn't fault you for really investing in these type of pieces. But there is a huge barrier to entry, again, with the mana base, with the Blood Gas, if you do go that route, with the Life and the Loams. But all in all, it is another cheap deck at the $600 mark, with more budget for the Scalding Tarn, more budget lands. You could definitely skim off some price to get into this deck. So off to let's go over to the other Grand Prix that went on. And White Black Eldrazi is very interesting to me as well. I think that this does have the Wasteland Strangler, which is a bulk rare at the moment. And this deck really proved itself with I mean, it won a Grand Prix, and a 4 in a Grand Prix. I do like the Wasteland Strangler. It seems to be a very good card at the moment versus those company-based decks, like Shooting Down Birds. There is a lot of Ancestral Vision starting to see a lot more play, and Wasteland Strangler just basically counters that card. And in this particular deck, it synergizes great with the Tidal or Scholar, synergizes decently with the Thought-Knot Seer, and it does have very good synergy with even like Relic of Progenitus to give those cards in the graveyard for the Wasteland Strangler on time. So I do like investing long-term in the Wasteland Strangler. It might be something better suited for rotation, but it already is at its bulk rare status, so it's hard to go further down. So that is another card that you could easily park your money in, and I wouldn't fault you. It won a Grand Prix. I'm surprised it hasn't spiked up just from that, and people actually testing out and trying this deck. It is a card that they forgot about how powerful it can be if it's built around. And I think this deck, if you could say that one card is really built around it, it's definitely this Wasteland Strangler, as you have the Tidal Scholar and the 4 of Relic of Progenitus, to work around it. So other than that, it's really business as usual with the modern scene, but really, really liking that Gifts. Checking out some of these other decks, the Spellquiller was definitely interesting in this deck with the only 2 creatures. Usually these decks just relied on Snapcaster Mage. Some of them were running Torrential Gearhulks as they were late games, another Snapcaster Mage basically. And by the time you actually spend the mana with Snapcaster Mage, like if you're using Snapcaster Cryptic Command, that's Torrential Gearhulk at that point. Even though Snapcaster is a lot better early with the Lightning Bolt and the Path to Exile, and it can actually even hit cards like Serum Visions. Speaking of Serum Visions, I think that the double reprint really hit Serum Visions. We can easily see this as another reprint in the box sets and the commander sets coming out. Other cards in this, Celestial Colonnade definitely needs a reprint. This is kind of the barrier to this deck, is the Scalding Tarn and the Celestial Colonnade. Speaking of which, we've talked about Scalding Tarn a ton, and this could be a card that could go back up to the $60, $65 mark quite easily. There still is a lot of Modern Masters product out there, and it just really seems to me that I could see another printing of the fetch lands. I think that for Modern to be a healthy format, and even Commander, a lot of pressure, if they really want to sell their box sets for Commander, this would be a great time to put a fetch land in each one of those box sets coming out for Commander 2017. It will also be a great thing to put in. I'm surprised that Wizards hasn't caved to that. There's only a certain amount of reprints they can do, and they saw how fast that the $3, $4, $5 cards, even though they put $700 worth of cards in like the Commander box sets, how quickly those cards like High Market went down from a $5 card to a 50-cent card. And I think that going forward, they might start to focus on these cards that can really retain their value to push out their box set products. But I think lessons learned from the 2 Grand Prix, if I were to just give the card, of course, that I'd invest in, it would be that Gifts Ungiven. And if there's a card that I missed, I'm encouraging you in the comment section below to point it out. What would be better, in your opinion, than the Gifts Ungiven? And is there any other Gifts Ungiven decks that I missed? Let's just take one last look at the Gifts Ungiven and see if there's any other archetypes. But Storm is really, really powerful, and this is all she wrote right here. A very, very budget deck. If you cut off $200 right there, that's the cost of Standard to get into a tier 1 Modern strategy. In fact, if we go down, look, there's a person that probably did cut the Scalding Tarns. Yep, cut the Scalding Tarns or in Flooded Strand instead, and probably doesn't hurt the deck whatsoever. But back to Gifts Ungiven, used in even a vintage deck, used in other modern mono blue, white blue decks, 4-color control in modern. So just check these out really quickly. Just one of Gifts Ungiven in this particular deck, but this is a Tron deck, and it is a one of in this deck too. So there's pressure from other decks to start out stretching that supply as well. So let me know in the comment section below what your pick from the 2 Grand Prix would be, and what other topics you want to be talked about on the Market Monday. Next week we do have a very special guest. We're going to talk a lot about the MTGO economy, especially when it is concerned to the limited and how it compares to Hearthstone, and just his insight. He's kind of an expert on this field, so be looking forward to that. On Monday we will release that video. This has been Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. Thanks for watching.